In Final Fantasy X, Seymour Guado proposes to Yuna as the party travels to Guadosalam. It becomes a point of contention amongst the party as to whether Yuna should go ahead or not. Some see the merits of the marriage in bringing hope to Spira, as Seymour explained, while others, like Tidus, want Yuna to marry out of love and not political reasons. Well, in all actuality, Yuna and Seymour do get married, making the what if of the title moot. But the marriage happens forcefully, and today we'll ponder what would have happened if the marriage had gone through as originally planned. Thus, the point where we veer off the true timeline is in Macalania Temple. The rest of the party never learn about Seymour murdering his father through Driscoll's sphere. Perhaps the sphere is never accidentally activated, or, considering Yuna's skill at dropping spheres, maybe it fell into the icy canyon at Lake Macalania. In the canonical timeline, Yuna explains under Lake Macalania how she wanted to convince Seymour to turn himself in to Yevon's judgment in exchange for marriage, if that's what it took. Yuna also explained on the Thunder Plains that she would continue her pilgrimage, even after the marriage. From these lines, we can extrapolate what, if anything, would have changed if Yuna's plans had gone true. The game conflicts itself when Seymour's dialogue at the temple implies Yuna hasn't confronted him about the murder yet, while at the bottom of the lake, Yuna says Seymour did not react to her asking about it. We can resolve this little hiccup by imagining a slight case of acute selective hearing on Seymour's part. As such, we can assume Yuna tried to propose the deal again after having prayed at the temple. Remember, the Guardians would have had no reason to barge in this time. Seymour, knowing the corruption at the heart of Yevon, would wholeheartedly accept the deal. They would travel to nearby Bevel, where the wedding plans would already have been in motion. Seymour would submit to a trial after the marriage, but knowing Yuna would likely want to attend, he would play for a bit of time so they could, hang out. Before we take a look at how things would play out from here, let's examine the reactions of Yuna's guardians. Some of them had already made their feelings about the issue clear at Guadosalam. Lulu had already expressed approval of sorts for the plans, giving Spira something cheery to talk about for a change. Waka, though somewhat hesitant, would likely follow Lulu's lead, especially considering Yuna would be marrying a maester of all people. Auron deferred to Yuna's decisions most of the time, and would not object, just like Imari. Riku would be happy with the decision, but for a whole different kind of reason. As Riku had subtly tried to drop at Guadosalam, she would be overjoyed if Yuna just got married and quit the pilgrimage. All of this would go over the head of the star player of the Xanacan Daves, who at this point didn't know about the ultimate sacrifice Yuna's pilgrimage was leading up to. Do you love Seymour? Tidus would think. Do you even like him? As such, most of the Guardians would likely hang about Bevel, waiting for Yuna to continue the pilgrimage. Tidus, though not having fully realized his feelings for Yuna yet, would likely be heartbroken about it all. Auron would try to rein his ward in, but Tidus would likely leave for the time being. He knew by now Jecht was Sin, and would now try to find Sin again, to once more look for a way home to Xenakant. Yuna's married. Seymour stands trial. He is determined to be innocent, with Maester Micah perhaps giving an excuse to Yuna along the lines of destabilizing Yevon's order otherwise. Yuna remembers Driscoll's words, "Stop, my son." She broods over the failure of her plans and keeps away from her guardians. She becomes jaded over Yevon's apparent corruption, and sees the evil in Seymour's heart during her time with him in private. Yuna takes what she believes is the last option, she has left in stopping Seymour. Bang. Yuna has committed murder. After sending Seymour, she returns to her guardians in tears and tells them everything that had happened. The group decide it's time to hightail it out of Bevel and escape into the Calmlands. What had canonically been a bit of a rest stop for the party now had a different tone to it. Yuna was a wreck. Not only had she killed someone in cold blood, but she was distraught to find that Titus had left her as well. Yuna's guardians tried to console her in every way they could. Lulu offered calming words, Oren provided wisdom. Riku tried to convince Yuna to leave the pilgrimage behind. Kimari stood stoically by Yuna's side. Waka said something tactless. Even after all this, Yuna's defining resolve stays true. I will not give up the pilgrimage. I cannot. I'll continue. I must. If I give up now, I could do anything I wanted to, and yet I could never forget. The party would continue on. They would have an even harder time getting through the Ronso, but Yuna would roll a full-on 20 on her persuasion check on Meister Kelk, and they would be allowed to pass, but without song or promise of horned statue. Viewing her father's fear on Gagazet, Yuna would not feel comforted, but rather see herself as having failed, with the events of Bevel weighing heavy on her heart. The mood of the whole group would be devastated, but they would still trudge on. Eventually, they'd arrive on the cliff overseeing the ruins of Zanarkand. Sitting at the cliff, they would find Titus, who had traveled ahead to see if his Zanarkand truly was in ruins. Yuna rushes over and embraces Titus, crying. Titus, who had no idea what had happened, thought for a moment the marriage never went true. Oren would soon explain the situation. Though there would be no romantic spring to frolic in, Titus and Yuna would find a spot to talk to in private. They would profess their love, but Titus would not ask Yuna to end the pilgrimage. He still didn't know what was going to happen to Yuna in the end. But what he did know was that he was a dream, having had the vision at the Wall of the Faith. The party confront Yunalesca, who drops the bomb of the final Aeon, while also mentioning Yuna's death. This is news to Titus, who goes absolutely ballistic on the whole group for not telling him before this. Yeah, would have saved us a lot of headaches if Lulu had just explained on Besaid how the whole thing works. They see the memory of Braskan's group, and Titus claims he'll figure out a way to break the cycle. They go beyond the doors to meet Yunalesca again. Have you chosen the one to become your faith? Who will it be? Yunalesca asks. The conversation goes on as it canonically does, though Yuna is markedly less confident this time around. The Guardians express disdain at the tradition of the final summoning, but ultimately, Yuna stops the conversation by agreeing with Yunalesca. There's always a chance it won't come back this time. It's worth trying, Yuna says, echoing her father's words. Oren displays a fit of uncharacteristic anger at this, thinking so far that he had succeeded in his mission to bring an end to the final summoning and sin. Enraged, he'd attack Yunalesca only to be struck down once more. Seeing Yunalesca's powers firsthand, and with Yuna already having given up, the rest of the Guardians would stand down. One by one they would volunteer to become Yuna's final Aeon. But finally, it would be Titus who would step forward. I'll find a way to break the cycle, he would in turn echo Jecht's words. I'll think of something. Yuna would turn Titus into Yuna's final Aeon, and they would commence their battle against sin. Yuna's final Aeon and Sid would clash, with the spirits of Titus and Jecht meeting. "I tried, Dad," Titus would say. Jecht would look at his son with sorrow, knowing what his fate would be, and say, "I know." Sin would be destroyed at the cost of both Yuna and Titus, and Yuna's calm would begin. The Church of Yevon would face the problematic PR situation of a branded heretic and known murderer becoming the latest superhero of Spira. It would not take long, though, for Micah and the others to spin a quick yarn explaining they had been in error in judging Seymour innocent, and instead they would decree Yuna had been a hero in ridding the church of the corrupt maester. The people would, of course, eat it all up. The remaining 4 guardians would go their separate ways. Kimahri would return to Gagazet, where he would rejoin the Ronso, who, by the way, never got decimated by Seymour in this alternate timeline. Riku would return to Bikanel, only to find home destroyed, as the attack had still happened without the involvement of our party. She would go on to search for the Albed, who would continue to be vilified. Lulu and Waka return to Besaid. Even though they feel the loss of Yuna heavily, their fate would not differ much from canon. As we see, this one small change could have the ripple effect that would change the game altogether. Instead of breaking the cycle, Yuna would only be part of perpetuating it. Who knows what would happen next, with Titus becoming the new sin, a new plan, a new summoner. But would the stars align themselves in such a way as to bring about someone who could destroy Yu Yevon's grip on Spira? Or would Yuna's story simply become one of the grand summoners, no doubt cleaned up by Yevon? This all is of course just my interpretation of how events would play out. What do you think? Do you think Yuna would have resorted to murder? Do you think she would have still refused Yunalesca's offer? Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.